Okay, let's have a look at this script. So you call in the data store service, data store service. Now, little tip, when you call services, generally you do it with Pascal casing. That means uppercase letter first. So I'm going to just switch that one now because I like it that way. And then we're going to get the service, and that's going to be the data store service, obviously. And you're going to make a data store. I like to separate again. Don't have these as one block here. So local, and then you have the click data store with camel casing, because this is something you're making yourself in the script like that. So data store service like that, and then you can say get data store as you've done. That's all good. Data store like so, and you're calling it clicks. That's okay. That's fine. You call it whatever you like. Okay, and then you're going to go on the player added. Well, you see, you got game.players.player added. Again, the normal way of doing that is actually to create the players, to call the player service properly. So we're going to say players like so, and equal game get service players. Now you got players as an actual service. You can just call it like you've done there, but it's generally considered best practice to call it as a service as you do, like all other services. So now we can just say players dot player added, and then we connect into that as you've done there, and function, and you're passing in the player as a parameter. Now again, I wouldn't use capital here. This should be camel casing. It's not crucial. Lua's nice and flexible. You can do whatever you like, but for consistency's sake, this is how I code. A parameter should have camel casing rather than Pascal casing. So we've got our leader stats. Oop, hit the caps lock there. Stats, and that's going to be predictive text on the IDE has really gone funky recently. Instance.new, and then we're going to make a folder. Now you've got folder, and then you're trying to put it straight into the player, but you've managed to make a mistake here where you put that whole thing in here like that, and that's not what you want to do. Whatever you brought this from expects you to do it like this, but I don't think you should do that either. In fact, like that, right? So that it's saying make a new folder and stick it straight into player. That's generally considered bad practice in this kind of scenario. As a rule of thumb, you shouldn't parent something until you've made any changes you can possibly make to it. So that, because once you've added it to the data model, that's the game itself. It's a lot more resource intensive to change anything when it's already in the game. So while you're sort of creating it, it's like it's in the ether. It doesn't properly exist, and you can change variables and properties about it really easily without any impact on the game. Now you won't notice it with just one tiny little thing, but it all adds up, and so it's good to get into good practice, to good habits before you do it. So we're going to get rid of this bit here, and we're going to separately set its parent like this. There we go, and we're going to put it in player like so. Now we want to do this as the last thing, so before we do that, we're going to name it. And you probably already found out about how this has to have a very specific name with lowercase leader stats, like so. Okay, now again, you can go on and you can make the bits and stick them into afters, but again, I would just parent it as the last thing you do. So next we're going to add the clicks int value. So that's going to be local, we're calling it clicks, okay. Again, I'm going to go with camel case, instance.new, and this is going to be an int value, okay. And we're going to also not parent it straight away in here, although you could. Again, let's go with consistency. We're going to parent it as a separate thing. Clicks dot parent, and that's going to be put in the leader stats like so. Oops, I've got the S on the end there. And clicks is going to be named clicks, like so. And you're setting the value to 0. That's the default value. I wouldn't worry, to be honest. But let's leave a bit of space there. We might rearrange things in a moment. Now, you're making a user ID. That's fine, we can do that. Local player user ID. I'd rather have that camel case as well. Equals, and then you're calling it player, like so, underscore, and then you're concatenating. That's the 2 dots there, which puts things together. And then we're going to put the player dot user ID. So this is going to be the key that we're going to use for getting the data from it. Okay. Clicks data. What's clicks data? Oh, that's what you're then going to put the thing in. Okay, so you're making a variable here called clicks data, and then success. I don't like to call it error message. I'm not really sure why that's such a common thing to do. It's the result of the P call. So because you can return stuff to it, it doesn't have to be the error message. It could be an error message. It could be the result of whatever the function that was P called was. So a P call is a protected call, a protected call to a function. Now we're going to just do another anonymous function in here. That's cool. Anonymous function means it's not named. You're just literally plonking the function right into it. So it's anonymous. It doesn't have a name. You could just as easily go local function myfunc, let's say. And now we got a function like that, and it's going to print run. I don't know. Yeah, so instead of having our function in line here like this, we could just say myfunc, and then that will do a protected call on this and whatever this returns. And then if we said return true, let's say, then the result will be true. And success will be whether this ran without erroring. Let's say we had, I don't know, let's say I forgot that. It would error, and it would return the syntax error to it. Now, I'm not quite sure with syntax errors, that might go a bit funny, but you use protected calls whenever you're going to make like a network call or something that could go wrong. It could be out of the hands of your scripting, your programming, what's running in here. Stuff that's on the internet fails all the time. You know, there things happen. Roblox servers could be down. A myriad of things could cause it to not work. Oh, sorry about that. And anyway, so what we're going to do here is doing this anonymous function. Sorry, I'm probably overloading you again. Nothing's been passed to the parameters, so that's just left as it is. And then in here, you're setting the clicks data to equal we're going to get the data from the thing. So clicks data store get async, and we're putting the ID that we made, player user ID, in there. So that's going to call this ID from this store and pass it into clicks data. We'll stick with doing this, but you could just directly pull it back. You put it straight into the value, but that's not necessary. So then you're saying if success, then, and in here you're setting the clicks dot value to whatever the clicks data is. And that's only going to do it if it's there. But there is a bit of a problem here, you see, because what if they haven't played the game before? Then this is going to be nil, and you're going to set this to nil. We don't want to do that. So we want to say if success and result. We want there to be a result and it be successful. And then we're going to set the clicks value to that data. Otherwise, it's going to be 0. Which is fine. We can just leave it as 0, which is what it comes out at naturally. You don't even need to set it. If you did want to default for it. Let's say you wanted people to start off with 10, then we could put that in here. Say clicks.value equals 10, and then that would be every player would get 10 when they start. But we're not going to bother with that because it's 0. We also, how about if it doesn't work, we want to handle that because the player is going to join the game and not be loaded. So what happens if a player joins the game and there's some problem with loading their data, they will now be in the game as if they were a brand new player, and then when they leave, our next section will still save the game. So we want to handle if it's actually not successful. So we can say else if not success. Then, and now what are we going to do? Most common is to just kick the player, or quite common is to kick the player. So we can say player kick, and you can put a string in here saying, I don't know, something like data could not load, or whatever your error, whatever your message wanted to be. But I'm just going to go with a warning. So it's a bit like print. Warning is a bit like printing, but it's like orange text. And we're going to say problem loading data. That'll do. And then we're going to say print. We're going to print the result because that will be whatever error message happened. Just helps us with seeing what's gone wrong here. But what would be nice is if we repeated this. If it failed, we could do that by saying repeat and then until success. And let's just this is the bit I was talking about that formats a document. Format document like so, and it just puts everything in the correct formatting if your code's correct, obviously. So we're going to repeat this until a success, but we can't just repeat it. There needs to be some sort of yielding. You can't keep making calls to data stores. So we're going to slow this down. We're going to put a wait in here. So if there's a problem, if it's not successful, we're going to say task.wait, and 6 seconds is what it used to be to make a call to data stores. I have heard that recently they've reduced this duration, but 6 seconds. I know that 6 seconds works, so we'll go with that for now. Okay, so now what will happen is it's going to try and do this loop. It's going to run this, and if it works, then it will set the value of clicks to the one it is, and if it doesn't, it's going to repeat it every 6 seconds until it finally does load. Up to you. You could, rather than this more complicated thing, you could just kick the player and get to try and load in again. I also like to set something on the player to say that they have loaded properly. So I quite often go with something like we could just put an attribute on the player. Not something you probably know about just yet, but I'm going to just say set attribute loaded, and then that's going to be true. Attributes are like custom property that you can set on any instance you like. So we're just going to make it so this will be on the actual player, the player that's in the game, and we'll see that. Okay, so that's the player added. Should be hunky-dory. And then now you're going to do for when the player leaves, you want to save their data. So you've got, let's change it to our way. So we're going to players.player removing. We're using the player removing event here now. Connect and anonymous function in here. And in this one, we also want to get the player, as you did previously. And you're making the player user ID again, just like you did before. So that's player underscore, like so. just check it's exactly the same. There we go. And then player dot user ID. Cool. We've got that now, and now we're going looking for the clicks value. So local clicks value, you're calling it. That's going to be in the player dot leader stats dot clicks. So that's what we called it. Yep. And then we get in the value of it. Now there is a bit of a problem here, because what if the player's leaving and leader stats hasn't been found? Well, actually, it's probably not a terrible thing that this is erroring out, because we don't want it to save if it hasn't finished loading. But if we just make sure, so we say if player not if not player get attribute loaded. So we're just checking whether this loaded attribute that we set here is actually been set. So if it's not, then we're going to just say return end. Oops, we need a then in there. Okay, so if not the player, if not player get attribute loaded. So if it can't find it, this will return false or nil, and it will be seen as not that. Then return end. This is known as a guard statement. It's just a way to check something exists, and if it doesn't, we're going to back out of this function. So the function will essentially end at this point and not go any further. So in fact, we can actually move this after this, and there we go. Now we've got our little guard statement at the front, which makes sure that the player has been loaded. And at the time, once the player is loaded, we know that the leader stats and the clicks value is all created. So now that's done, we can go and do the saving like you're doing there. So local, and we're going to say success result again, and that's going to equal a p call, a protected call, function, another anonymous function here, and we're going to set the data. So clicks data store set async, and then it's going to got to give it the ID again, player user ID. That's the key that's going to be, and we're going to give it the data, the clicks value. Cool. And again, we really want to do this over and over. If we don't, so if success, then return end. We don't want to do that. We want to say else. So next time we're going to break it up into different lines. And if it's not successful, else, we're going to warn could not save data. And we're going to print the result, just so that we can see what's going on. And again, we're going to tie this into a loop. Repeat until success. And format document. There we go. So now we've got that, and it will keep repeating. Oh, we also need to wait. Task wait. And again, this is 6 seconds. Okay. Now, one more thing that I've just thought of that we need to add back into the player added. What happens if we're trying to load and the player leaves? So we also want to say until success and player. Because if the player's left, we don't want to be doing it. In fact, we should say player, and just to make sure it's not in the moment of destroying it, we can say if until success and player dot parent. Because sometimes when things are being removed, they still kind of exist, but they're unparented and they're back in the sort of the ethereal space that doesn't exist, if you know what I mean. Okay, so that will just make sure that the player actually is still in the game when it's finished loading. Okay, and then you say bind to close. So this is where it's gone wrong a little bit now. So we're going to say game dot bind to close Sorry. This is another area where you got an error here. By the look of it, it should be colon bind to close, not dot bind to close. Function, and then you put player in here. Now I don't think that player is passed. Yeah, no, there's nothing. There's nothing passed by the bind to close event. This doesn't pass anything to be used, so we don't want that player in there. We're going to get the players by looping through them. So we're saying for underscore. Underscore is just a way of throwing away a variable. It means that we get something here, but we don't want to use it. Normally it'd be like I or index or something of that nature. Index. It's the key of, you have like a key value pair. That's why this is going in pairs. But we don't want, we're not even going to use it because it's just a numerical list known as an array. So we're going to get the player from that we're going to loop through all the players. So we're going to say in. Now you've used pairs, which does work, but we can use iPairs because iPairs is for numerical arrays. So we can then say players. Get players, and that's going to return an array of all the players in the game. First one will be 1, but we don't care about that, and then the player. And we're going to loop through, so this will loop through each player in the game and try and save them. So we could write it all out again here, but rather than writing it all out again, rather than doing this anonymously, why don't we just make it its own function? So let's come back up to the top and say local function, and we'll call it on player removing, like so, and we're passing it the player. And then we're going to take this from in here, like so, and we're going to pop it into here, and then we're going to call it in here. So we're going to say on player removing, and we're going to pass it the player, like that. Now we're going to do the same thing in here, on player removing, and we're going to pass it the player. Now there is a bit of a problem here. This is going to try and save each player one at a time, which, if one has a problem, that means that all players don't get saved. So there is a way we can run this so they all run at the same time. Instead of it running in a linear fashion through each line of code one at a time, we're going to sort of like spur off and do these things all at the same time. So let's put this back here. We'll say coroutine dot wrap, and we're wrapping on player removing, and then we're passing player into it like this. Now this is a bit more advanced, I know, but datastores is, unfortunately. Right, and that should be all hunky-dory. Let's have a quick look through it all. Grand. Okay. I will see how you get on with this.